Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our second live stream, going over the IFS steps and questions. And today we're going to get to the more nuanced questions. So my name is Uri Talmor, and I've been using IFS for about 20 years, and we started this last week. We'll be meeting every week for the foreseeable future until we get through the table I am about to jump into. One quick announcement is that, first of all, I cringe a little bit in even saying this, but if you could like and subscribe to this video, it would really help us out. I think the main thing is it just helps us reach more people. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be great. And I know this is a little coercive, also a little cringy for me to play along with, but you can't comment in the live chat unless you are subscribed. Okay, so please don't cancel me. And let's go ahead and dive in. And let me just say, as we get going, any questions you all have, Cherie is here again. Thank you, Cherie, for being here. She's going to help me with questions. So just feel free to interrupt, ask questions, break this up as much as you need. Those of you who are here, just so it's just not me droning on and on. And Cherie, you too. Feel free to just let me have it. All right. So last week, we briefly went through the IFS steps and some of the, I think, most essence questions, the kind of the core questions from each step. I tried to leave it just one question. If you had to remember one question for each IFS step, what would it be?
I have to interrupt you.
Please.
Peter says he lost your video, and I also lost your video. So I'm not sure what is going on.
Let me see here. How about now?
Oh, there it is.
I came back. Okay, great. Thank you for the heads up. I'm gonna go back, view tab. Okay, can you still see the table?
I can still see the table.
Okay, let me know if it cuts out again.
Okay.
Because I went to a different tab.
Okay.
Where I couldn't see the questions. Actually, I'm gonna just stay in that tab for now. Okay. I can't because I can't control the document from there. So anyways, let's just keep going. Thank you for that. So now we're going to get into the much more nuanced table. And before we even get to IFS questions, I know I said last time, I want to keep this as focused on the IFS steps as possible. And there are some practices that I've learned that are just so valuable and I think so important. We're going to go there also to a degree. So the first one, and like I mentioned last time, purple are questions that you can continually ask, theoretically continually ask. You wouldn't necessarily ask these all the time, go right through all of this. It was interesting. I was looking up the link for the IFS circle to share with you all in the description. And actually turns out that it has not exactly a wait list, but I think they start at different times. I still think it's absolutely worth doing. It's a great starting point for IFS, but you might have to wait a bit until they start the next cohort. But there was someone who reviewed it and they said, they commented on some of the demos that Dick had done, and they were struck by how non-linear IFS can be and is oftentimes. So again, in the beginning, it's so important to just have as much of this memorized as you can. Then you're going to practice it more and more. And eventually you're going to get to a point where you're kind of like an improv jazz musician. You'll just have a sense and you'll work with the client to know what you're going to ask, when you're going to ask it. So all that said, purple is questions you could ask pretty much at any time. In some ways, the green are the questions that are more geared towards the protector parts. And much further down, I won't bother scrolling down, but if you scroll down the table, there is there is blue, there are blue sections, which would be for the protected parts, which IFS would call the exiles, and oftentimes in Gestalt, we would call it the underdog. Protected parts top dog, protected parts underdog. They tend to be more vulnerable. Cherie, do you have the link to the table, and do you mind posting it in the chat?
Sure.
Can you? That would be great. I thought of that. That'd be a good thing to do in the beginning. So this table, where do you find it? It's in the description below, and Cherie's going to go ahead and post it in the live chat. Okay. So the first thing we have here: pause, allow, appreciate. For any significant sensation or emotion. This I got from Julia Mikk, who is an amazing breath worker in Boulder. She studied and then kind of developed her own flavor of a breath work practice that is incredibly gentle, relatively speaking. So I highly recommend her if you're into that or wanting to explore that. And so I did one of her trainings, and a lot of her background was also in cranial sacral, which cranial sacral, if you're not familiar, is one of these holistic approaches that very much trusts the body's natural capacity to heal. And I won't get into explaining what cranial sacral is, but there is I think she's a physical therapist named Risa Caparo, and she wrote a fabulous book called Awakening Somatic Intelligence. And her focus is more kind of PT. She shares a lot of different case examples from her clients where they had these, severe-ish injuries, physical injuries, and she would work with them in a way where they relaxed different parts of their bodies. I didn't know this until I read that book, but apparently, most of us know about the diaphragm that's underneath our lungs. It turns out, according to her, and probably anatomy, I trust her, that there's other diaphragms. There's one in the throat. There's one kind of the root chakra underneath the pelvic bone, and they hold up different organs. And so I'm just giving you one example of something she would help her clients explore, is feeling into these diaphragms and working on relaxing them. And then she does some other things where essentially she is helping people explore their relationship to gravity, of all things, the pull towards the earth, and playing around with it in a way where some people end up feeling like they have kind of a different relationship with it after some time, that they just feel more buoyant and almost like being able to kind of float across the earth, and whatever's going on in their bodies to create that perception we won't get into. And she has this one principle she talks about, that she's talking about energy and consciousness, but she's also talking about the body, that the body naturally self-organizes, self-renews, and is self-aware. Self-aware kind of meaning that it has its own intelligence. So I love that piece because it parallels so well how Julia thinks about working with any energy that shows up as she's doing breath work. And I do want to note, one of her teachers is Gangaji. And Gangaji's got a channel on YouTube, just another lovely teacher. And she very much is one of those people who stands for, if we can just be with, and if we can just stay present with whatever arises, nature knows how to take care of it. Nature knows how to heal. So all that said, there is a meditation that Julia taught us, and it's called, I call it Pause, Allow, Appreciate. And I have a recording of it. So I'm going to put that in the chat so you all have access to it. It's simply a recording in my Google Drive. So you can, on your own, it's not too long. I think it's like 10 minutes. You can listen to that to get a better sense. But essentially for us and for our work with parts, when we come across anything with an emotional charge and you have a sense, it just simply needs to be integrated within this process, if people can just pause and allow, and if they have kind of a long enough runway to do that, it will settle. That is my absolute experience pretty much almost every time. And we're going to get into with contracting when that might not be the case, but it boils down to right relationship. If we're relating to what's going on inside of our bodies with trust, with openness, with any sense of care or curiosity, it will settle. It's that simple. And so the third piece, pause and allow, appreciate. As things settle, if you're able to slow clients down, can you just be with it? Can you just allow it? There's nothing here that needs to be changed or fixed. Just be present with it and notice how it responds. Eventually, as it settles, if the clients take a moment to simply appreciate what just happened, for a moment, can you just appreciate that it's settled? And I go more into this in the longer meditation, which of course you can just draw on to form different questions you might use with clients. But in whatever way you phrase it, if you have them appreciate what just happened, you're essentially appreciating that there is some greater intelligence that is able to support healing and nurture healing. So I think that's good for that one. Okay. All right. One down, a few more to go. All right. The second one, this is something I got from Paul Ginter when Delene and I were in a level 1 training as a PA, and Delene was there. He did this piece in the beginning, which I think he might have said he got from Hakomi, but it was just part of his style, and it was so beautiful that as people start to name parts, just having them notice how the part responds just to the attention. Oftentimes, simply that has a healing effect. So, whatever part's there, as you bring your attention to it, notice how it responds. More times than not, there's a somewhat positive response. Sometimes the part might get a little bit activated, and if that happens, it's okay. It's all important information that you can work with. So I do this almost every time in the beginning. If we get into demoing some stuff, you'll see, as you put your attention on it, just notice how it responds. It's just a nice, gentle, easy way to get started with things. So this next one, is this more than you can handle? I alluded to this, or I talked about this in the last week's video. We don't ever want to make assumptions that what's going on for the client is more than they can handle. Even if they think that in whatever moment, or there's a part that's worried that it would be too much, you want to almost always ask this question: is this more than you can handle? Or can you hang in there with it? And if they get, and oftentimes they'll realize, what, I can handle this, I can hang in there with it. Just let them tell the part that. Let it know it's not too much, and then notice how it responds. The noticing how it responds, this is I think you hear Dick do this all over the place. I call it capturing the impact. When you're noticing, I'm going to go a little broad for a second, just to kind of flesh out why it's important to do that. In authentic relating, they have a lot of, they call them relational meditation practices, where essentially people get together and share in particular ways that deepen their awareness of what's going on inside of them and deepens the sense of the relationship. at the same time. They're pretty amazing practices, and the communities are just an amazing resource to get into a certain kind of personal growth and develop those kinds of skills. So one of the things they talk about is when we are interacting with one another, this is Robert, I'm spacing his name. I'll remember his name later. But somebody from the integral community who is an authentic relating practitioner and trainer. He talked about in one of the trainings I did that you can look at the depth of the kind of communication in 3 levels. There's what I'm doing right now, which is simply sharing information. So we can share information with people, and that can lead to a certain kind of connection. But if I want to make it a little bit more relational, I could then share what I'm feeling. So sharing the information and weaving anything along those lines. So right now, as I am, sharing with you all, I'm noticing I feel very curious about how it is for you all to just hear me talk and talk and talk. So that's a feeling curious about that, and maybe a little bit self-conscious around that. So it's a short little example, but you might notice that as opposed to me just talking to you, sharing information, if I share an emotion, it feels a little bit more relational. And then they talk about how if we share how we're being impacted by the other person, that's even more relational, and people feel that. So in this context, let's try to continue the example. I'm noticing in being with you that I also have a lot of appreciation that you would make the time to come and to learn more about this. So all that said, in authentic relating practices, they'll set up different games where people practice sharing how it is to be with one another, how they're impacting each other. And if you have a chance to explore it a bit, they're just lovely practices. So all that said, a lot of what we're doing with parts work, if I needed to, just simplify what is the intervention in its kind of purest, simplest form, it's essentially dialogue. It's having dialogue with these parts as opposed to monologue. If I'm just sharing information, I'm going through a monologue. But if I'm having a conversation where we're sharing how we're impacting each other, we're sharing our responses to what the other person has said, that's a dialogue, and that feels very, very different. And so all that said, it's really valuable to capture the responses. I could go on and on. I'm just going to share one last piece about this. When is it most important to capture responses? And I know I have it baked somewhere in here in the table. You know what? I'm going to practice not doing that. So to be continued. When is the best time to capture responses? We'll get to that when we get into self to parts relationship. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. Can you just stay with it? Very similar to, is this more than you can handle? It's just another way to say it. Let it know it can have all the time it needs. This is related to A Course in Miracles principle that I love. It's essentially that in infinite patience, we then tap into infinite love, and that infinite love can come in and potentially work miracles. There is something about when people can get into a state where there's no time pressures and there's no kind of rushing or deadlines, more like, think about it in terms of when you're sitting down to do a creative project, and the ideal is that you're letting the process have whatever the process needs. That's the kind of space you want to you want to create. And ironically, if you're thinking about the Course in Miracles quote, in infinite patience, then can come in infinite love. Ironically, that actually can speed things up quite a bit. So here and there, it can be really beautiful to just, let it know it can have all the time it needs. Just you create the right kind of space, and then things move even more quickly. And then I touched on this. Sometimes I'll throw out the Risa Caparo idea about being that nature naturally self-organizes and self-renews. I really like that languaging. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So this I touched on last time. Trust the client's inherent wholeness and capacity to heal. Did Cherie, did I talk last time about A Course in Miracles? And no. So some of the inspirations for this, IFS absolutely embodies this in its philosophy. And there's a bit of a nuance with IFS, where for IFS, we're trusting the client's capital S self to have a healing effect, which I think is great. If we can unblend from parts enough, if we can get enough self online, it's really self that has the healing effect, and that it's simply inborn, inherent, eternal. It's a very holistic frame, in a sense, that people have this no matter what, and we can always uncover it or nurture it. I would encourage you all to think about it in an even broader way. And I'm not saying that IFS would necessarily disagree with this, but to just kind of extend it out a bit beyond that the healing isn't just self that comes in, but that within each part, within each person, there is already inherent wholeness. There is already a capacity to heal. So I think one of the first Western psychotherapy models to speak to this was Gestalt psychotherapy, where there was such a pushback against the disease model, a pushback against kind of allopathic Western medicine that framed things more as people are somewhat broken, need to be fixed, which opens up the door to certain kinds of interventions like medications. But Gestalt took more of a stance around it's the environment. Like, these are people who are simply having responses that are completely understandable given the context. And if we can come in and give folks the right kind of support, they will heal their unfinished business. They will metabolize the dysregulation that they've got in their bodies, and they will naturally grow and develop. So I encourage you to relate that way to really any expression of consciousness that you work with. In IFS, we're mainly talking about parts as different kind of pockets or entities of consciousness, but everything, anything, any expression of consciousness has this capacity. So I mentioned A Course in Miracles, another source that takes this kind of to the nth extreme, and you can find this online. It's out there for free now. There's kind of a side publication that those folks created called The Purpose, Process, and Practice of Psychotherapy. It's like 17, 18 pages long, absolutely worth reading. The crux of it is that as a psychotherapist, there might be a whole lot of things that you do to try to help your client heal. And I know this is an extreme thing to claim, but according to A Course in Miracles, the only thing that actually helps your client heal is your knowing that they're already whole. Relating to them in that way is what creates the healing. Everything else you do is window dressing or is a vehicle to extend that kind of knowing. And I think I did mention last time, I might be mixing up supervision groups in this meeting, but I'll just say it in case I didn't. Another Course in Miracles principle is that healing is one who temporarily has more giving to someone who temporarily has less, with a huge emphasis on temporary, that eventually we all get there, eventually we all return, however you want to relate to that, kind of how we come back to some absolute level of reality, quote unquote. But eventually we all get all the gifts. But in the meantime, some of us maybe have been through more or have developed in different ways. And so when we're with clients, we might temporarily be able to hold more of the awareness, simply an awareness of the wholeness that we genuinely see in our clients. And as we can stay grounded in that, as we can stay in that kind of consciousness, it opens up more of a door for our clients to experience that. I think this is just such an important piece. I want to just share about an authentic relating practice that has been one of the most beautiful, kind of expressions of this. So in authentic relating, I mentioned, there are practices where we're sharing what it's like to be with each other. So an exercise I actually do with my couples that I love, that I encourage you to play around with, it's called the noticing game. So I have a couple, and I use this almost every time. If a couple comes in and they say to me, we don't feel connected, we're just so disconnected, and it's been this way for a while, we don't know how to fix this, I almost immediately say, I know just the exercise for us. So I have them turn towards each other, and I have one of them start. I ask one of them to start with the prompt, in being with you, I'm noticing. So we're immediately going right to sharing impact. In being with you, I'm noticing the impact of being with you. And so the first person will share what's alive for them. And I do encourage them to share some feeling or some sensation if they can. For some clients, that's a little bit new. That's a different channel they may not be used to, but we keep encouraging them and kind of scaffolding them in that ability and capacity. And then really advanced, authentic relating folks, some of our experience might be more on a thinking channel. More advanced practitioners will name it as a thought. They won't just say, I'm noticing that you're just such a lovely human being. They would frame it as, I'm noticing a story about how wonderful you are, or I'm noticing the thoughts, wow, my partner is so wonderful. There's so much I can say about why that can be a really helpful practice, but I'll just let you all play around with that. So anyways, all that said, the first person starts off, in being with you, I'm noticing, they share, and then the response is, in hearing that, I'm noticing. And again, try to share some feeling or sensation, and then you can branch out into a little bit more of your experience, and then you stay with that, the second prompt. Well, in hearing that, I'm noticing. So you're just continually sharing impact. What I've seen with clients who do this one simple exercise is they almost immediately, like within 2 or 3 people talking, they feel more connected. And I'll give you just one example. This was the first time I ever used this with a couple. And it was a Sunday. It was football Sunday. People here in Colorado, a lot of them like the Broncos. And I was working with a couple where it's a husband, wife, and I explained the exercise. They turned towards each other, and the husband, tongue-in-cheek, got it started. And he said, in being with you, I'm noticing how much I'd rather be watching the football game. And he was being tongue-in-cheek. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. The wife got it. He was kind of teasing us both a little bit. And, he wasn't even really sharing a feeling per se. But the wife hung in there with it, just immediately responded with, in hearing that, I'm noticing how much football has meant to you. And just very completely sincere, and the husband started to get misty-eyed. And then his response was, in hearing that, I'm noticing how you know me better than anybody. And boom, he wasn't even taking the exercise all that seriously, and then they're immediately connected. Okay, all that said, I'm just setting the stage for this kind of more advanced, authentic, or more, let's just call it complex, authentic relating practice, where this community will set up opportunities where groups of people, like 5 or 6, will come together to do what they call an organic circle, where they will essentially do the noticing game, but with all the people in the group. You know, and being with you all, I'm noticing a little anxiety in my chest. And then someone might respond with, oh, and hearing that, I'm noticing feeling some care for what you're expressing. And so there's that exercise. And then kind of built on that, as people get experience with that, groups might then offer the experience to do what's called a birthday circle. And a birthday circle is where the rest of the people in the group, they all focus on one person, and they continually share what it's like to be with that one person. And when I first heard about that, I had so much resistance. I'm like, why would I do that practice with a bunch of folks who will probably tell me negative things about who I am? And it just goes to show how much most people are just not aware of this inherent wholeness and lovability that Course in Miracles, you know, talks about, and we see with each other that it's already there. So we eventually, in my Gestalt class, started doing this practice, and it was so beautiful to watch how with my Naropa students, they tended to be a more kind of caring, loving community. And so the initial shares were maybe a little bit more positive than you would get with a group of like a group of strangers. But there was a similar kind of process where for the birthday person receiving, it might have felt really, you know, a lot of cognitive dissonance trying to take in and receive essentially like a more higher self version that everybody was genuinely reflecting back to the person. But as we stayed with the process, we would do this for about 60 minutes. It was so beautiful. The students receiving the birthday circle gradually would start experiencing themselves the same-ish way that their cohort members were reflecting back. And I thought that's why they called it the birthday circle, because every time we did it, it felt like people were able to just kind of give birth to more of who they truly were by simply being, you know, in relationship with folks, sharing their experiences. But it turns out they call it the birthday circle because it's like, it's your birthday, so you get all the attention. So I love the birthday circles because I think in a lot of ways that encapsulates a lot of what we're doing as psychotherapists, where we're holding that vision in that space. And IFS does such a beautiful job of setting up experiences where clients can give that to themselves and start to see themselves as more whole and complete. Okay.
Cherie,
Yes.
are you moving to the next one?
I am.
Okay. Is there a way for you to easily turn on closed caption? I already looked it up in the settings. I logged in as you, and it seems as though because it's live, you're not able to do it when it's live. But unless you know of some way of doing it.
Let's see. Send feedback. Dashboard.
And if not, it's totally fine. If you would just please make sure to, state the sentence that you're on
Yes.
as you move forward. And then I think afterward we can turn on closed captioning. But
great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. That's great feedback. So yeah, we'll definitely look into that, and I'll turn them on for the other videos. That shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
It should be easy to do.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So now we're contracting. Okay. So now we're talking about protector parts, contracting in the green area. Is there any part of you that has concerns about going inside? So this is even more preliminary than what I shared about last week, where you've worked with protector parts and you're just checking, if there are any other protector parts that have concerns about working with whatever particular exile and more kind of emotional, burdened part in a memory potentially. Here you could do it. This is being very, very safe. So as you're even setting up with the client, if they would like to do parts work, if they would like to do IFS, it's pretty rare for me to have clients, although it happens, where they come into the session and are just expecting to go inside and do parts work and do inner dialogues. So for most other folks, there's going to be some sort of moment of gathering consent. And this is just one way of saying it. Is there any part of you that has concerns about going inside? Next question, is there a part you'd like to work with? This is more where I would start. Typically, there'd have to be some context for asking about if there's concerns. So if a client already shared some sort of reservations or it's new, maybe you'd frame it more as a possible concern. But eventually you get past that. There's a bit of a culture, a bit of familiarity. And then, right in the beginning, is there a part you'd like to work with? I always try to, by the end of a particular session, make a note for the next session, either around what parts we want to continue with or what parts we make an agreement at the end of the session that we're going to want to circle back to. And so I highly recommend doing that. My memory's not the best, so it's a necessity for me. And this is also kind of feels like a newer IFS. The training's out now, the book's out now, seem to put a lot more emphasis on the importance of continuing with the parts you've already started to work with. And I've seen examples of therapists even, if something else seems more in the foreground, being a little bit more directive and asking that to relax so that we can stay with whatever we worked with last time. I don't work that way. I can understand the value of that and the continuity, but in my experience, things can change so drastically from session to session. I think we do change every day, every moment. In some ways, we're just not the same people we used to be. So I'm much more inclined to just follow the client's lead, and I always try to say, last time I made a note that we were going to at least check in with that 3-year-old part that we worked with. Can we do that? How's that feel? And oftentimes, even with that, even when it's so clear and distinct and there seems like maybe there was a lot of energy left, they're just ready to work with something else, or there's something else more in the foreground. And there are oftentimes opportunities to circle back to parts. They might show up later. I think if I had to guess, the intention behind being a little bit more rigid in following up would be that there's a thought that the new parts that are up might be distracting a bit. And I think that's a fair case to make if the new parts showing up are more protector parts or managers. But even then, I think net, it's faster, ironically, if you just go with the flow. If some protectors there, just go into the 5Fs, befriend it a little bit, get curious, how can we honor it, address the concerns, and just trust that, whatever's in there that needs to be worked with, if it's still there, it still needs to be worked with, it will circle back. So yeah, let's keep going. This one I like. This is the one I use more. Would you like to tune in and see what parts need the most attention? Again, this is after working with someone for a bit and they're familiar with IFS and they've developed some experience with it. As they're sharing, let's say they're sharing more openly, you could ask, can we name that as a part of you? I think this is from the workbook. I don't know that I ever really do this one. I'll do more this next one. Sounds like you have a part that XYZ and a part that, XYZ. I'll just start naming them as parts. It's a little bit more organic and in the flow of the conversation. And especially nowadays, at least I'll say in the United States, although I know our media the US media has quite a reach. It's just so much more of our culture. Movies like Inside Out, and I think a lot of folks now have done parts work and talk about it, that there's kind of an understanding around subpersonalities. So we have, I think, a lot more kind of permission and cultural understanding around just using a parts language. And here's another one. Okay, so this is more of an example. You have a part that judges this voice, feeling/part. That would be an exile and wants to push it away. I would maybe say, it seems like, or it sounds like there's a part that is judging the feelings of sadness. That's something I learned from authentic relating. If you're doing these authentic relating circles with each other, your experience is that somebody seems a certain way. That is much more accurate than just naming any kind of assumption or judgment as truth. So I like that language in a little bit more. Okay. Here now, the next question. What do you notice now in your experience? So this comes from Gestalt. And this is continuous. I ask this a lot, oftentimes, because I want people to be in the channel of their body, in the channel of their emotions, to at least have part of their attention, ideally, there, because that is the land of the exiles, of the wounds. It's going to be more in the emotional body. And so in Gestalt, there's a practice called the awareness continuum. And it's essentially, Gestalt is so focused on bringing awareness to what's happening in the here and now. A lot of Fritz Perl's background was in Zen Buddhism. So he felt like whatever needs to be worked with is here and now. He didn't have really much of a need to go into people's history, to hear stories. He was much more interested in what's happening in your body here and now, and that was, in essence, the trailhead to what needed to be worked with. And what he saw is that a lot of people are just simply dissociated, in a sense, like cut off, not aware of a lot of what's going on in their body. He worked with William Reich, who was a very somatic practitioner. In some ways, started a lot of the somatic work that has become more popular nowadays. He was the beginning. He was the beginning in a lot of ways in Western psychotherapy, and then Fritz Perls made it much more accessible in his work with Gestalt psychotherapy. So in Gestalt, at any point you can check in with the client and just have them notice what's going on right now. What are you noticing right now in your experience? And implied is, what are you noticing now in your body? But you can, of course, nuance it to a part. What are you noticing now about that 3-year-old part? This is such a beautiful way to just have people give themselves the right kind of attention. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think that's good enough for that. So how do you notice this part feeling? This again is Gestalt-esque. Fritz Perls was very focused on the how of someone's experience, not what they want to say, not the content, but how they're experiencing it in the moment. And I have here felt sense. Last week I talked about how there are some other approaches that very much overlap with IFS and might be an even better starting point. Focusing is one of them, by Eugene Gendlin. And he's the one, as far as I'm aware, made the term felt sense popular. Somatic folks at Naropa, they kind of joke about how often, the somatic students joke about how often they talk about felt sense. And it's a well-used term for really important reasons, because again, the felt sense gets us into the somatic channel, the emotional channel, the energetic channel, which is where a lot of the exile work is. And I'll just allude to it here. I'll go into this a little bit more when I make the video about other approaches to explore and getting started with IFS. But there's a guy, Joe Shirley, and he took focusing and kind of nuanced that even more. So I would look him up, and he's got some really nice videos. He made kind of a course on how to explore parts and your somatic experience of parts in a really nuanced way. I'll just give you a few examples, like as you're tuning into a part, and this would overlap with the 5 Fs and befriending parts and getting to know them, a little bit more fully. As you're noticing a part, the sensations around it, does it have a particular temperature? Is it hot, neutral, cold-ish? Where along that spectrum? How along that spectrum do you notice the temperature of the part? He'll talk about the density of the part, the energy of the part. Is it solid, liquid, gas, or anywhere along that continuum? It could be a bit of a gel. And then he's got like 3 or 4 others. Is there any movement to it, or is it stationary? But I'll let you explore that more on your own if you're interested. Those kinds of questions, though, are such a beautiful way to slow down, to deepen, and to help people create a more direct relationship with the part. Okay, so we'll keep going. Where do you feel this part in or around your body? So here we're getting into this is the 5 Fs. I think this is actually, so flesh out is one of the 5 Fs. And so these are all going to be along these lines. Where do you feel this part in or around your body? The around your body, I used to hear Dick say that a lot. I don't know if he still says that consistently, but it is an interesting thing to at least keep in mind. In my experience, it's pretty rare to have parts outside of your body. But when I've worked with folks who experience more significant dissociative symptoms, it can be exactly that way, where they can feel a part literally floating outside of their body. And then as they're working with that part, they oftentimes then feel it start to come back in. And then as those kinds of parts get closer and closer, they can feel more of that part's emotional or sensation experience. I'll just give you one example. There was a client I worked with where she experienced a series of very severe assault type traumas, and she could feel these parts. They were all outside of her body. And so as she was working with, say, the first memory, it did exactly what I'm describing. It would start to come closer, and and she was feeling compassion towards it. And then as it entered her body, she essentially experienced a panic attack. Just a lot of energy, a lot of anxiety. And, I just, kind of helped her midwife her way through it, just being with it. And panic attacks, if they can be related to in the right way, are just a very concentrated, dense amount of energy just trying to complete through the body. And people will tell you with panic attacks, even as extreme as this may sound, if they cannot panic around the panic attack, after the panic attack moves through, they feel a whole lot of relief. Because it is like you're kind of going into an emotional outhouse and just, releasing a ton of energy. So that happened with her. She was able to, experience the old panic, work through her body, and then felt somewhat better. And interestingly, as she worked through each one, she got to the point where she had so much trust, and she was a very kind of heartfelt, caring human being. She had so much kind of love and appreciation by the time we got to the last one, that when this last one came back into her body, she didn't have a panic attack. And she simply felt this cool energy move through her body as it was arguably integrating or returning. So that speaks to the importance of like, how are we relating to the parts? And the more we can get in the right relationship, the more graceful the emotional processing can be. Okay, so I touched on this one. This is the Joe Shirley. Is it more like a solid, a liquid, or a gas? Just flushing it out. The temperature one, here you have it. I jumped ahead. Does this feel like I have any movement or stationary? Oh, this is a great one. If you listen internally, do you notice any inner sound or voice? There's something interesting about just the imagination and how powerful it can be. I know this documentary didn't age well, but there was a section in What the Bleep where they talked about how high performance athletes, if they simply vividly imagine their workout routine, they physiologically experience, I think they said it was like in the 90 percentile of the effect of actually doing the workout. So there's something very powerful about imagery and the kind of imagination channel. And there's something about, being able to voice things, if people need to, want to give it a voice, give it a sound. And sometimes people feel maybe too self-conscious, or it might feel a little embarrassing. And so if they can just imagine, let the part show them in their imagination what sound it might want to make or need to make, or words that it wants to say, but even just breaking it down to the sound level, there is something that can be very, very cathartic about that. So keep that in your back pocket, just letting parts or emotions make sounds, even if they're just imagining that, they can be really powerful. And then this, of course, is right out of Gestalt. Say you're working with the part and it's more of an emotion, it hasn't said much of anything. It's just, let's say, a lot of anger. Really at any point when it feels right, you can weave this right in. If it could speak, what would it say? And more times than not, the parts are able to communicate with words and express themselves verbally. Not always, it's not necessary, but it can speed things up a bit if these parts can express themselves with language that gives it a different kind of meaning. And I'll just name Gordon Neufeld, one of my absolute favorite attachment specialists. He's from Canada. He's got wonderful different classes about attachment parenting related to anxiety, attention issues, anger, bullying. He's able to tie it all back to attachment in this really non-pathologizing, beautiful way. And he's of the same ilk, believing that emotions need to be processed, need to be integrated. And so he talks about how emotions seek, he calls them his laws of emotional processing, something along those lines. Emotions seek expression, consciousness, and then they can find equilibrium. And so expression is simply what we see, where the feelings are there, and we're feeling certain ways. But in emotion seeking consciousness, he's speaking to that the emotion wants to be understood. So say the Dan Siegel parenting piece around name it to tame it, children may not have the language to name exactly what this feeling is, but you can be the surrogate, awareness and frontal lobe, and give those emotions a name. And there's something when we get the right name for a feeling, or the feeling's able to express like what it's really wanting to say, where it's able to be conscious in a way that's more than just being expressed. Essentially, it's like a type of understanding that's important to get to. And so this question, if it could speak, what would it say, kind of opens the door for the emotion, not just to be an expression, but to actually be made more conscious. That's one of the things I love about it. Okay, we'll do a couple more. I wanna practice ending on time. We'll just do this an hour at a time, just so people can plan around it in a way that works for them. So flesh out. Do you get an image of this part? IFS is I was talking to my therapist who she uses process work, the Arnold Mindell practice. And she was saying how, in her understanding, IFS uses a lot of the imagination channel, the visual channel. And I think that's true in a way. It certainly can make things more accessible and clear when and if clients get images of parts. So for that reason, if nothing else, this can be a really helpful thing to throw out there. Like, is there an image of the part? Do you get an image of this part? And I do want to say that doesn't have to happen. And some folks just don't have that channel online very much. People can develop it over time. I've had a lot of clients who, for years and years, they just don't get images of anything. And then for whatever reasons, it just starts to come online, and later they're getting images. But if and when that happens, that's a much more direct way in a lot of ways to work with parts when you do get an image of them. I'm hesitant to jump ahead because I know it's down there somewhere. Oh, I think it's just right here. So getting the age for the part obviously is a way to then dovetail right into an image. And then just another way of asking the same kind of question. Can you see this part in your mind's eye? Just some other wording. I think 3, is the workbook. So this might have been in the workbook. Okay, I think we'll pause there. I'm aware that this has been a lot of me talking, which it would be even if you all were asking questions, but I hope it's making sense. And I do want to say one last thing. I should have said it in the announcements. I'm going back to the first video, and I'm adding in the timestamps so you can just jump to particular sections. And I'm going to try and stay on top of that so that these can be a little bit more helpful resources. So look for these videos to be timestamped in the future. I think that's it. All right. Thanks everyone for taking the time and being a part of this. And if you're able to make it, we won't be meeting on the 25th of December next week, but we will be here New Year's Day. And then for the foreseeable future, every Wednesday until we get through this table. All right. Thank you, everyone. Be well. And yeah, until next time. This is like the awkward Zoom goodbye, but it's not Zoom. It's just an awkward stream goodbye.